Okay, thank you for the introduction. You basically summarized my 45 slides, so thanks for that. Yes, as you mentioned, high availability for Oracle Database Standard Edition 2 is the topic today. And thanks for introducing me. So basically you said everything which is on this slide. So I work for Trivaris in Germany, and my focus is high availability, mostly RAG and data guard, but we have got new features, training, multi-tenant training, and putting all these things together. We have some new features in this training, we have high availability, and we have some features of the multi-tenant architecture in this training. So this basically sums everything up. I'm on Twitter, MarkusDBA. I'm blogging, markusdba.net is my English blog, .de is a German blog. So I'm answering questions from training participants there. And okay, well, that's about me. I'm sure you have heard about the ACE program. As mentioned, I'm Oracle ACE. There are 700 persons worldwide working for the community, sharing our knowledge. And as already mentioned, I work for Trivaris. 27 years on the market, Swiss-based company with locations in Germany, Austria, and Romania. So the German-speaking area mostly. 700 employees, 4,000 training participants, about 2,000 projects every year. So that's a basic slide we had in our presentations for a long time. And now there's a small bottom line, now part of Accenture. Yes, Accenture, as you know, this company, just doing a lot of business consulting, management consulting, but also technical consulting. Bought Trivaris in June. And so we are now part of this big company and looking forward for the things to come. Okay, so our slogan, together for a smarter life, work together, make IT, will make your life smarter. So what's on the agenda today? Short introduction on availability. Then we take a look at standard edition high availability, which is a really new feature, 1.5 years old. High availability by using refreshable PDBs. It's more data guard-like for standard edition 2. Then putting both things together, standard edition, maximum availability architecture, not to be compared with maximum availability architecture because there are some restrictions and it's not one-to-one the same, but that's basically what you can do with standard edition 2. And at the end, of course, summary and some links to documentation, most notes, and blog posts. Okay, let's start. When you think about high availability for the Oracle database, what do you think about? You think about Enterprise Edition, RAG, Data Guard, or even Active Data Guard. And in short, you think about a lot of money. Enterprise Edition licensed by CPU, some base price, real application cluster additional 50% on this base price per CPU. Data guard or active data guard is really another 25%. So really expensive. And to cut costs, many customers think about leaving the Enterprise Edition. In fact, Oracle sales did a good job in the past selling Enterprise Edition to customers who do not really need Enterprise Edition. And now people are thinking about that, either going down to Standard Edition 2, or even leaving Oracle to some open source databases or other databases, but that's not the topic today. So I come to Standard Edition 2. And what are the possibilities there? Well, until the old database 18c, we had RAC, 2 nodes, 1 socket each, 8 threads per instance. As you know, there's a limit of 16 threads per database for Standard Edition 2. On RAC with 2 nodes, you have 8 threads on each instance. We have possibility to create failover cluster. You have to write your own scripts for that. It's not rocket science, but some work to do. And of course, these scripts have to be maintained, checked with new versions, etc. And we have some data guide-like third-party tools. DBWizard standby. We as Trivalis have some DB star standby, which is basically the same. And all they do, shipping the archive log files from one server, one database to the other, and on the other side, the standby side, CV logs are applied. That's what we can do now. And it's, of course, cheaper. Base price is much cheaper. Of course, there are limitations, but many customers can live with that. But then, and we have got some customers using RAC and Oracle Database 12.2 and 18c. Then April 2019, when Oracle Database 19c was released, there was a small change in the licensing information. RAC not available anymore in Standard Edition 2. One of my mates on the German Oracle user group, Johannes Ahrens, who was responsible for everything around Standard Edition, wrote a tweet. Is it a documentation bug? But unfortunately not. It was not a documentation bug. It's a licensing change. Of course, you can discuss about that. And in fact, there are things which cannot be discussed within Oracle. But I don't think I think it's not really fair to change the licensing of such a feature within a release family. We have the 12.2 family with 12.2, 18c, and 19c, and changing the license at short notice is not the best way, in my opinion. Deprecating it and saying, okay, it will be desupported, not available later, would be fine, but this was at short notice and not the best way. So there was a lot of discussion in the Oracle community, and even discussion with Oracle. And almost 1 year later, Markus Flechtner, who's responsible for product management for high availability, wrote a blog post. Hey, there's a new feature, Standard Edition High Availability, announced in March 2020, and it took then some time to the next release update in April for the feature to be available. So they heard the community, and we now come to the topic of this presentation. What are the current out-of-the-box high availability solutions for Oracle Database 19c Standard Edition 2? And it's basically the same for 21c. So no additional products, no own scripts, just what's there out of the box within Oracle. I will start with SEHA Standard Edition High Availability. Introduced with release update 19.7 in April 2020. There were a lot of issues in this release update, a lot of bugs listed in the release notes, and I had to open some service requests to get this thing running. So use 19.8 or higher for standard edition hybridity. Nowadays we are on 19.13, which was released last week, I think. So we're fine with that. One important thing, there's an Oracle clusterware release update both in Grid Infrastructure Home and Database Home. Both must be on the same version. I made the mistake when testing it the first time that I installed Grid Infrastructure, patched Grid Infrastructure, and then installed the database software and patched the database software, and then there was a version mismatch between the Oracle clusterware release update in Grid Infrastructure Home and Database Home, and they did not work. So keep that in mind. Best thing is to run patch auto for both Grid Infrastructure Home and RDBMS Home. Basically, ZEHA is a failover cluster database configuration for SE2, monitored by Grid Infrastructure on a 2-node cluster with ASM or ICFS as storage. I think that's a good choice for Oracle databases, and running on Linux, Solaris, Spark, and Windows. When thinking about Windows, you can use ZEHA as a replacement for failsafe, because failsafe is deprecated with database 19c. I must admit I don't know the status with 21c, whether it is supported or not. But in the long run, it's a good idea to get away from Oracle failsafe. Concerning licensing, okay, you don't need an extra license for that, but as with all these failover environments, there's this 10 days rule. So 10 beginning days can be if you need the second cluster, just 10 days, you don't need a license for that. And the advantage is, thinking about rack, where we had only 1 socket per server and 8 threads per server, you can now run your database with 2 sockets and 16 threads on 1 server, and the failover server can have the same configuration. So keep this licensing in mind, and as always with licensing, licensing may change. Contact your sales representative and check the documents. So what's there? Basically a failover instance, a failover cluster. So we have got the instance running on the left. Server fails, instance fails, whatever, and grid infrastructure detects the failure and starts the instance on the other node, on the right node. As we know, a failover cluster. Shared storage available, so the data is available for the second node, and database can be started. How to configure it? You start with a normal SE2 database on 1 node. There's nothing special in there. You cannot say, I want to make it a ZEHA database. You simply create a database. If your SP file and password file are still stored locally, you have to move them to UCR. Give the commands for the password file, ismcmd password copy into this group. And then you have to modify the database configuration with an OCR. SFOCTL modify change the location of the password file. And then you have to specify the nodes which are available for ZEHA. Think about a larger cluster with more than 2 nodes. You have to name the nodes on which the database can run, parameter minus node for modify database. You name node 1, node 2. And that's it. Everything else which has to be done, like creating directories, is done automatically by grid infrastructure when the database is started on the second node. You can move the database from one node to the other. There's this relocate command, which is known from RUC1 node. There are some additional parameters for RUC1 node, which cannot be used for ZEA, like timeout, train timeout, because these parameters require application continuity, which is not available for Standard Edition 2, but simply use relocate database from one node to the other. Then the database instance will stop on node 1, first node, shut down immediate, so it takes some time depending on the open transactions. And when the database is closed, it will be opened on the second node. So there's always only one instance running. And you will have a short downtime for your applications. Failover, database failover, very simple. Oracle Clusterware does a job for you. The failure is detected, and the instance is started on the second node. Nothing special there, and it works fine, and at least according to my tests. So, client connect, for the host name in your TNS names, or for example, simply use a scan name of the cluster. And for the connection service, use an application service of your ZEA database. So nothing special there. Just keep in mind, do not use the node itself, the first node where it is running, but you have to use the cluster name. Fan and fast connection failover work fine. A colleague of mine has tested that, and he was really happy with that. So that looks good. Yeah, some small things. When starting the database manually, you can choose a node. Once again, it's not RUC1 node. No RUC1 node. It's basically a single instance database. When you move from one node to another, it's temporarily a RUC database with two instances, while that's not the case with ZEA, only one instance running almost. Unfortunately, it does not work with the Enterprise Edition. If you try to configure a Enterprise Edition database, so a database which is running from an Enterprise Edition home, you cannot configure it. Oracle detects that you're running from an Enterprise Edition home, and there's this error message, PRCD 2088. And yeah, that's one of the things I don't like. I think failover clusters are sufficient for many customers. Why doesn't Oracle enable this feature for Enterprise Edition? But it's their decision. As mentioned, application continuity, which is basically a replay of failed statements. Statements are buffered at on the client level. Application continuity is not available with ZEA. It requires Enterprise Edition plus Active Data Guard or RUC1 node or RUC. So all these options are not available for Standard Edition 2. So no application continuity. What we have is transparent application failover. And if you specify according delays and counts for the retries, tough will work with ZEA. That's for there, which is basically the replacement, or replacement not really, but the successor of RUG for Standard Edition 2, less functionality, but that's the way it is. Now, let's take a look at Refreshable PDBs. The small change now, because what I said about there is applicable to both non-CDB architecture and CDB architecture, but here we are talking about PDBs, so refreshable PDBs, and this high availability feature is restricted to the CDB architecture. That's not a critical issue because you probably know with 21c, CDB architecture is the only architecture which is available for the Oracle database. So what's a general feature refreshable PDB? The idea is I've got one master database, one master PDB, think about a large production database, and you need some copies of this database. And you don't want to copy the whole database every time when you need the current data. So the idea is create an initial clone of this database. So copy these terabytes of data once, and later on only replicate or only copy the changes which have been applied to the source database since the last refresh. You can then use this copy, this refreshable PDB, as a master for additional copies, or as a beta database for reporting, because it can only be reopened read-only. So here are the use cases. So there's a picture of the production database on the left, CMO1. Here's the CMO2 as the refreshable PDB. As mentioned, can only be opened read-only, so you can use it for reporting, and as a master for additional clones like CMO3 on the top, full clone, or snapshot clones. And the idea is that all these additional clones do not need to access the master database or production database, so there's less I/O on the production system. So how to set up a refreshable PDB? We need a common user in the source database. Okay, source database must lose local undo, which is standard since 12.2. But just to mention it, we need a common user with create session privilege, restricted session privilege, and this over privilege, and which is, in my opinion, a little bit not funny, but astonishing. On the source database, the user needs the create pluggable database privilege. So, but we do not create a pluggable database on the source, so it's astonishing, but it's required. Then we need a public database link from target database to the source database with a simple, well-known syntax. And then we can create the refreshable pluggable database. So create pluggable database, the name from source PDB at source CDB. If you don't use Oracle managed files, we have to use the file name convert parameter, and we can define a refresh mode, in this case, every 4 hours. And that's it. In this case, Oracle will refresh the PDB every 4 hours. Okay. There are some different refresh modes. Refresh mode every 10 minutes, so Oracle does it automatically. Refresh mode manual, So you have to run a refresh manually. And refresh mode none means refresh is disabled, which makes a refreshable PDB a normal PDB. I'm not really happy with the automatic refresh because when doing a refresh, the PDB must be in mount state, must be closed. So if you're using it for reporting, so you run it read only, you have to close it and then refresh it. And if you have to close it every 4 hours before the automatic refresh starts, you can even run it better manually, as shown here, close immediate and then do the refresh. If you don't do refresh, if Oracle cannot do refresh because the PDB is open read only, the refresh will be skipped. And we'll see the consequences later when we come to the source of the data. Refreshable PDB is protected, so we cannot open it in read-write mode because if you think of the refreshable PDB open in read-write mode, it would be a split brain between source and copy. Okay, you can see the refresh mode and the refresh interval and the last refresh from the CDB.PDBs view, and have to check the timestamp on the source database with the SCN so that you know the time when the database was refreshed for the last time. So what happens during a refresh? Here's a short excerpt from the alert log, and you can see that Oracle retrieves the archive log files of the source database via the database link, and then applies the archive logs, so all the transactions in the archive logs to the refreshable PDB. So, which means that you need the archive logs. If the archive logs are not available, the refresh will not work, and yeah, it will get stuck. So think about your backup strategy, your archive log backup strategy. Keep them perhaps a little bit longer on disk, so that there's all the archive logs are available for the refresh. And this is the point which I mentioned before, when the PDB is, the refreshable PDB is open read only and cannot be refreshed. You have to think about your archive logs. You cannot delete them. You have to keep them available for the next refresh some hours later. This is the aspect which is important for normal refreshable PDBs, that we call it this way, but not for high availability purposes. We'll come to that later. Okay, as mentioned, okay, reader information is used and retrieved via database link. Archive logs must be available. Otherwise, the refresh will fail. I said all that before, except the last line. When you back up the target CDB, don't get surprised when Oracle does not back up the refreshable PDB. That's a design decision of Oracle. They don't back up the refreshable PDB. Okay. High availability and refreshable PDB. Well, the idea is you have one PDB. Let me take the PDB1A, which is part of the CDB1, and refresh this PDB to another CDB, CDB2 in this case, and we keep the CDB the PDB1A and the CDB2 in mount state, and refresh it every minute. That's the shortest interval, which we can define. Refresh mode every 1 minute, and then every minute the reader logs are transferred and applied. The idea behind that, or if you want to use a CDB2 for another database, let me say the PDB2A in this case, the idea behind is that you have your mutual protection of 2 PDBs, so that CDB1 holds a PDB2A as a refreshable PDB. So if one of the CDBs fails, we have the copy available for both PDBs. And in case of a failover, we just simply disable the refresh and open the PDB on the standby CDB, let me call it this way, and start work with that. Okay. So here's the procedure. Just create a pluggable database with a short interval, refresh mode every 1 minute. I said that before. And just keep it closed, so don't use it, but then it's available for an automatic refresh. And in case of a failover, okay, that's a little bit complicated because you cannot directly use the refreshable PDB as regular PDB. There's a connection between both PDBs, between source and target, and you cannot remove this connection because the source database is not there. And this connection prevents the PDB from being opened read-write, from opening read-write mode. And you have to do one more step. You have to clone the refreshable PDB first. You can open it read-only, and then you can copy it, either a full clone or a snapshot clone. Snapshot clone means Oracle accesses the master of the snapshot for reading, and if some blocks are changed, they will be stored separately. You can merge them later to a normal PDB, but in terms of high availability, it's the fastest solution. A full clone copies a full PDB, takes some time, needs more disk space. No? Unfortunately, there's nothing like the reinstantiation for the refreshable PDB, and you have to keep it in mind when the other PDB, the original source CDB, opens again. You have the same services running on both databases, and you have to avoid a split brain. Switch over for SE2, not available. There's a refreshable PDB switch over for Exadata and Oracle Cloud, so Enterprise Edition and all that expensive stuff. These are the drawbacks of using a refreshable PDB for high availability. The full procedure, some more of getting the refreshable PDB running as a normal PDB. Simple thing is clone the PDB. So you have to open it read-only and create pluggable database. The work PDB, so this will be the database you work with from the refreshable PDB. This file name conversion is you then Oracle managed files, or you use the same statement with snapshot copy, then you will have the snapshot clone. And the materialize command later on can make the snapshot copy a normal PDB. For connecting, for client connect, you have to put both nodes in the address list. You have to disable load balance because load balancing doesn't make sense. There's only one instance is up and running. No, one database is available. Sorry, one PDB is available for for writing. Retry count, in this case 20, retry delay 3. So every 3 seconds, all the clients try to connect to the PDB. So you have with 20 retries, 1 minute time for get the refreshable PDB up and running as a normal PDB. If this time is sufficient, you have to decide yourself. I think it will in most cases take a little bit longer. And if you want to use it for high availability, this feature, I think it's a good idea to have some scripts available which do the job then. But it works fine, and in most cases, or in many cases, it's sufficient. Of course, we can combine those features. Standard edition maximum availability architecture. And well, if you think of MAA with RAG and data guard, we have got RAG on the left side, on the primary side, RAG on the right side, standby side, combined with the data guard. Very expensive, but of course we can use the features we have learned, ZEHA and refreshability for that. And this looks then this way. We have ZEHA on the left and ZEHA on the right, and a refreshable PDB between both CDBs. Less cost, but those features combined. And the procedure is, okay, we create a primary CDB, make it a ZEHA CDB, create a standby CDB, make this CDB a ZEHA CDB. So just add the note, we create a primary PDB, and then the standby PDB as a refreshable clone. For the clients, once again, putting both things together, place both scan names in the TNS Connect and use an application service. That's it, as mentioned, putting both things together. So to sum up, high availability for the SE2 without additional costs. They are very easy, out of the box available, refreshable PDB in theory with a 1 minute interval, 1 minute data loss, no automatic switchover, no observer, and this additional cloning which is required. It's not enterprise edition high availability, but from my experience when talking with SE2 customers, it will fulfill their needs in most cases. We don't need maximum protection, zero data loss. It's sufficient for most of them. But of course, you have to talk with your customers or with your users about the requirements. And of course, it may end up with the conclusion that you need enterprise edition. Further information, Oracle documentation, database installation guide, known issues in the release notes. I think, as mentioned, there were many issues with 19.07. This has changed, but it's a good idea to keep an eye on this documentation on the release notes if there are still issues. Refreshable PDBs are covered in the multi-tenant administrators guide. Listed some MOS notes here with some further information on the refreshable PDB. There's not that much information available on ZEHA, on MOS, more refreshable PDBs. And some blog posts on that one, the announcement of IDEA, 10 days rule, and some other blog posts of some people who, including me, who checked ZH and Refreshable PDB. That's it. It was really fast, about 40 minutes, I think. However, it was not too fast. Are there any questions?
It was not too fast. Thank you for detailed information on high availability of standard editions, Markus. Appreciate it. So I have a question. Do we really need to have an extra license for ZH, or?
No, stop sharing. No, you don't need an extra license. It's included, and clusterware or grid infrastructure does not require an additional license, so we are safe on that side too. You simply need standard edition 2 license for the one server you're running, and for the second server you don't need a license as long as you keep the 10 days rule.
Okay. What about the multi-tenant features? Do we need to have multi-tenant license for standard edition?
Without multi-tenant license, started different. With Oracle 19c, you can have up to 3 PDBs in a CDB without additional license. So you don't need multi-tenant license, a multi-tenant option, which is part of the additional option for the Enterprise Edition.
If you use 3 PDBs, right?
Yeah, if you use more than 3 PDBs. No?
Okay.
So you're on the safe side with SE2 and 3 PDBs or less.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, got it. So guys, any more questions? Let me check the chat box to see if we have any questions. I think Frank asked a question, but it was asked in the middle of the presentation and I didn't get. Frank, if you are online, could you please type your question one more time? Because it was asked in the middle of the presentation. I didn't know.
This question was if the software is automatically created in the second home node. I must admit I haven't tested that, but I don't think so.
Okay.
No. So you have to install the software on both nodes.
Okay, perfect. So the reason why SE2 doesn't, the rack cannot be used or doesn't support the rack is to push the customers to use a ZH, or what do you think on this?
So let me answer the second question first. The question is, directories are created automatically. This is for admin directory and our ADR. As mentioned, configuration files are on ASM or on shared storage, but this directory is for alert log tracers, etc. are configured. Okay. Now to your question on concerning ZH, concerning SE2. It's my opinion that Oracle doesn't like ZH. Doesn't like standard edition. If you remember 12.102, standard edition 2 came late after the Enterprise Edition, and I think it's not so popular in the US, and Oracle doesn't really recognize it's important or often used in Europe, which is at least my impression. Oracle says, okay, either use Enterprise Edition or come to our cloud, but don't use this small SE2 database.
Wow.
And this is my personal impression, and restricting RAC removing RAC from SE2 is kind of thing in this direction. But it's my personal impression. impression.
Yeah, good point.
Okay. There's another question. What's the price of RAC for RAC for SE? You don't have to, when you go back to 18C, which was a last release with RAC included for SE2, you don't need an additional license. It's part of the SE2 license. You buy license for your 2 sockets, and you have 2 nodes, each with 1 socket, and then you can run RAC with SE2, just without later with 18C, and not anymore with 19C. But you don't need an additional license. There are no options for the SE2 database.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.